Hello and welcome to the Redwood Startup Showcase. I'm Preston-Werner, and with me today I have Ryan Chenkie from CourseLift. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Tom. It's great to be here.
All right, well today I'd love to see what you're building with Redwood and talk a little bit about your architecture, but I'd love to start first with a demo of your product, and you can just tell us about it at a high level and give us a little demo.
Sure, that sounds great. Let me pop open my screen here so that we can take a look. And I can tell you a little bit about the backstory and all that as well. I'm a developer. I've been a developer for, 6-7 years now, working professionally as one anyway. And along with the stuff that I've been developing software-wise, I've also been teaching on that same stuff. So I'm a course author. I've created courses and I've offered them to students, both for free and for pay. And I want to continue doing that more in the future. And I want to help other people do that as well. One of the pieces of feedback I've heard from a lot of course authors or would-be course authors is that they've got something to teach, or they believe they have something to teach, but they don't really know the steps necessary to actually get it out into the world or to make a good go of it when they go to, let's say, offer a course for sale. And I've heard a lot of stories about people offering courses for sale, and the whole sales process just kind of flops. They don't really make any sales. Maybe they make a couple bucks, but it's not worth their time. So I want to help people out with that process, because I think it is a process. It's a formula that you can apply to kind of any course you offer, to go through certain steps to make sure that you're reaching out to a well-developed audience and one that would receive your course well and want to pay you for your knowledge. So that's what I've set out to do with CourseLift. So what you can think of CourseLift as is a course hosting platform. So that's kind of table stakes. There's lots of these around. But what it brings to the table is guidance for how to build and market and eventually sell your course. It's got those two layers built into it. And so where I'm at right now with it is I've got the course hosting stuff built out. And I'm actually hosting a course of my own. I'll show you kind of two sides of it. The first is the author side of CourseLift, and the other side of it is the student side of it. Why don't I hop actually to the student side just to give you a really quick view into what it looks like if you're a student coming to a course hosted on CourseLift. This is one that I put together. It's all about Prisma. So if you're a Prisma developer, or if you want to be a Prisma developer, this is a good intro course that I put together. So it's kind of a getting started from 0 to 1 type course. And this is what it looks like served by CourseLift. You would come here as a student, you drop in your email, and then you would get access to a collection of videos like this. From the author's perspective, they would be in here in their CourseLift dashboard putting together their courses, which would eventually be served out to look like that to their students. And so where you might start is you might get into the studio area here in CourseLift, and you might upload some videos, which you can then put into lead magnets and courses and then offer those to your students. So, it's a fairly simple process, like you might be familiar with if you've used something, like CourseLift before. I'll find a file here to drop in, so we can drop in this file. Here's a video that's going in. It goes to this service called muse.ai, and they offer video hosting plus a lot of AI features on top of video, which is really cool. So it takes a second to process. That'll go through and process. But while that waits, we can take a look at where I've already arranged some of this content in this lead magnet here. Getting started with Prisma, I've got this content area. And if I want to go in and, let's say, add a lesson to this first module that I've got, I can go and select an upload that I've already got in place here. So I might select that upload. I've already got a title and description that I've placed in at the time of upload. I can just choose to save that, and now it's reflected over here. If you want to get a look at, because this is local here, what we're looking at right now, whereas that first view, the student view that I showed here, this is deployed. This is what's actually in production right now. If we want to see what it looks like to view this course as a student against local, well, first we get an error, which is no good. We can try to refresh that. Still getting an error. Not sure what the issue is here, but what you would eventually see is something that looks like this, but right now with just 4 videos and a single module. So that's those are the two sides of it. We got the author side and the student side. And this area here gives you a chance to arrange your content, manage your comments for your lead magnets, deal with your settings, etc. And then all sorts of other features that you would expect to see in a course hosting platform as well, with eventually the whole kind of launch guidance, launch strategy piece of this coming into place, which will help you as a course author start to put together a really well-reasoned launch and one that you can expect to make a decent splash when you actually do go to launch. So I'll stop there, and maybe if you've got some questions, happy to answer any questions you've got on that.
Sure. This looks really good. What I'd love to understand is what parts of this are Redwood, are you using any other technologies? Maybe sketch out the architecture overall that you're using.
Sure thing, yeah. So everything you see here in the author side is Redwood. So full Redwood app from the ground up, using all of the great Redwood features that are there, like all the generators, a little bit of scaffolding. I don't use the scaffold feature too much, but certainly generating SDLs, working with the GraphQL layer, working with TypeScript in Redwood as well. I've chosen to use TypeScript, which has been really beneficial. Basically everything that Redwood comes with, I'm making use of in this whole author experience. We've got our routing set up through the Redwood routes.ts file that I use, creating routes to serve a page here. Each of these is a page. Lots of cool stuff that Redwood offers there. What I am doing over here on the student side is this is actually a Next.js application. And it's a very lightweight Next application, pretty small. The reason that I'm using Next in this case is because I'm using server-side rendering. So this is a feature, if you're familiar with Next, you might know that they offer server-side rendering. This is basically all to give the student a very quick experience in terms of loading up the page and being able to serve them content that is server-side rendered. It's beneficial in this case because this content doesn't change a whole lot. You might make the argument that it could even be static in some cases, and maybe we have just a build process. Probably wouldn't work too well. So server-side rendering is a good happy medium for this aspect of it. There's those two pieces in terms of what you might see as a user. So author in this case and student over here. I've also got a third layer set up, which is a small Express server, which helps to handle uploads. So when you are in here in your studio area and you drop an upload into place, it's going out to an Express server that I put into place. And that is, what's it doing there? It's taking the upload, it's putting it into an S3 bucket, and then it's got some like a queue setup, a queue job setup, so that it can actually take that content and feed it over into Muse.ai, which is that video hosting service that I'm using. So there's kind of three applications, if you will, set up to serve CourseLift right now. There's a bunch of other kind of third-party vendors that I'm using for various pieces, which we can get into, but that's the high-level architecture from an application standpoint.
And how do you have these different services deployed?
So deployment-wise, we are on Vercel for pretty much everything. We've got CourseLift itself being deployed to Vercel or Vercel, however you might like to say it. And it's serverless functions that are serving the backend for this. I am just in the midst of figuring out whether or not I want to switch that up, though. I'm a fan of serverless deployments. It's worked well thus far as I've been in kind of this build-up stage, and I've got this early access for a single course, which is mine as a course author out there. But I'm wondering if I might want to move over to something that is more traditional, kind of a long-running server as we typically have known them, and maybe using something like Render for that. Render has got a very good set of blueprints for deploying Redwood applications. And I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about that move, whether or not that's something that I might like to do. The reason I like the idea of having a long-running server instead of serverless is for ease of debugging some things. That's kind of one of these ideas that is kind of primary in my mind. Serverless, I've run into some issues. Like when I was putting this thing up, the student experience, running on serverless with Vercel, it was difficult to debug some errors that I was getting. It turned out that I wasn't base 64 decoding something that I needed to be on the back end, and I was having trouble even reasoning about where that issue might lie, just with the logging and the error messages that I was getting from Vercel. I don't know if that's particularly a serverless issue versus maybe just a Vercel issue, but it was nonetheless kind of annoying. So I've been thinking about this move to Render or to another long-running host. I run a small agency as well. We build applications for clients, and we have standardized on Redwood. So any new application that we build is based off of like a starter that we built on Redwood. And we're using Render as our kind of long-running server target of choice. And that's where I might go to with CourseLift, but I haven't made that decision just yet.
All right. One of those nice things about Redwood is that you can make that choice sort of in the middle of building your startup. If serverless works, you can deploy serverless. If later you decide you want a traditional server environment with very little code change, you can end up on a server full environment.
Yep, absolutely.
So how are you running the Express server?
The Express server is that Express server, because it needs to handle uploads. Not a good choice to try to deploy that to serverless, at least not in the way that I want to use it. I kind of want ease of use. I want to just be able to deploy it as a long-running server. Right now, I've got it on Heroku, so it's running on Heroku. But this is another piece that I'm thinking about moving over to Render. And if I move CourseLift proper over to Render, then the Express server that's handling uploads should come with it too. Well, another reason that I like the idea of using something like Render is because I have got server kind of like binaries that need to be in play for doing certain things. This is more so on the like agency work that we do. You know, we need to do stuff like produce PDFs on the server. We need to be able to kind of like generate and read PDFs, fill PDFs and stuff like this. There's some of these tools that you can get like PDFTK that are just not as easy to use in a serverless environment. But you can just run them on something like Render and away you go. So kind of an argument in favor of that long-running server. But yes, so to answer your initial question, the upload process on Heroku right now, probably moving over to something like Render.
Okay, got it. And tell me about any other third-party services that you're using that you like. You used to be a developer advocate at Auth0, so maybe tell me about what your authentication strategy is, or logging. Like, what are you doing for some of these other things?
For sure, yeah. So right now, authentication is happening via Supabase. I'm using Supabase both for auth and for my database. So Postgres database, running on Supabase. I'm not using any of the really cool stuff that Supabase offers, like row-level security that you can get so that you can scope down access to individual database rows. I think that's a really cool feature, just not one that I've wrapped my head around yet and that I think is worthwhile to put in. However, I am using Supabase for auth and for the database. Whether or not that's going to change is to be determined. I like Supabase for kind of simplicity, for giving a really good limit in terms of number of users that you can have in your application if you're developing with Supabase. That comes into play here in the student experience, especially if you think about the number of authors you might have, and then the number of students that each author might have under them, that can start to expand your user base quite quickly. Every student that comes in here and drops in their email becomes a user in the overall application. It becomes a user in CourseLift in general. So that's a lot of users, and Supabase has some good limits that Auth0 doesn't, something like Auth0 doesn't have the same kind of offerings for. To match. So Supabase for now has been really good. A couple things that are missing in terms of features that that I'm hoping get put into place by the time this all rolls out for wide adoption, and that's things like being able to dynamically set a redirect URL, so that if I've got new authors coming into place here, and they go and they drop in their URL, like if you're over here, you get to specify your domain. I need to be able to put that domain to effectively put this domain on an allow list for the redirects that are allowed to happen throughout the whole authentication flow. And I can't do that quite yet with Supabase, but I'm hoping that's something that can go into place before I launch, so that I don't have to kind of rejig things to, you know, just to work around that. It is something that like a provider like Auth0 would be able to handle, but again, there's these trade-offs that are at play. Overall, though, really happy with Supabase. They are a great platform. Another third-party service that I'll mention that's really cool is Cloudinary. I'm using them for everything that you would see in terms of images. So let's see. with the exception, I should say, of the thumbnails that go with videos. Those thumbnails actually come directly from Muse.ai, which is that third-party video hosting service I mentioned. But if you look at any images here, like that are tied to your lead magnets or images that would be in your courses, other images around, like, I don't know, in your account settings again, right? Like this image here, that's all going to Cloudinary. Another spot that I use Cloudinary actually is if we're in Studio and we are thinking about uploading a file, another media type that you can consume as a student from your course author. Those files go to Cloudinary. One thing I like there that's offered is it's based on a third party to Cloudinary, but it's effectively like a virus scan that you can just automatically attach to your uploads, which will be, it's going to bode well for students and for authors of this platform, because we don't want people, uploading malware or anything like that and delivering it to students via CourseLift. We want to avoid stuff like that as much as possible.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but other third parties, a good way, this is one way I always like to think about third parties, because oftentimes I forget in the moment, but I just look at my environment file and see what kind of keys I've got going in my application. Use Postmark for transactional emails. They've been great. Oh, a third party that I'll mention that's really great is Approximated. They are at approximated.app. And what they do is they allow us to have things set up for a custom domain. So if you're here, this is the deployed version of this course I've got. So the Getting Started with Prisma. I've got this domain, howtoprisma.com, and I want to set up a subdomain which points to CourseLift effectively, is how this architecture works out. With this, setting up that whole custom domain flow and setting up records for it can be challenging if you're doing it on your own. Approximated effectively gives you like a fixed IP address that you can work with to point any number of domains at. They will parse records for you and do redirects and stuff like that. So when it is time for an author to set up their custom domain, all we do is we say, hey, give us the domain you want, like, and even the subdomain that you want to go to for your course. And then here's an A record that you have to go and add to your DNS, and done. You're good to go at that point. So approximated.app, definitely check that out if you're looking for help with custom domains. Looking at my environment file, and I think we've covered most of it for third parties that I'm using.
All right. What about in-app stuff? Like, how do you do your CSS, for instance?
CSS styling. I am using Tailwind. Big fan of Tailwind. Effectively, it's Tailwind all the way through, except for maybe some custom like edge casey things where just like a CSS file might do the trick a little bit better. Usually, what I do is I've got like an index.css, and I'm just looking at it now. I do things like set some overrides for like WebKit appearance on like inputs and stuff like that. Just like some high level CSS stuff, but everything else is Tailwind. Tailwind classes applied to components. The way that I like to roll with Tailwind is, try as much as possible to, if you're gonna have like a long string of class names that go into shaping a component, like let's say it's one of these cards up here, make a component for this card, which it's one thing that I really love about Redwood is, sometimes when I'm lazy, I don't like to create like a fresh new component directory and set of files. If I just, if I'm creating a component inside of another component file, I'm like, let's just put it in place. Let's put it at the top of the file and then move it later if need be. But with Redwood generators, I am finding that I'm far less lazy when it comes to that. So, it's just a simple matter of yarn, RWG component, and then the name. And then you've got your component, super simple to generate components that way. And, I'll put that long string of Tailwind class names right into that component. And then if I need to do stuff like create some kind of margin around here, I usually just set up like a section or a div surrounding that component that I'm consuming. And I apply like some class names for adding margin, top and bottom, stuff like that. But yeah, Tailwind for the bulk of it, 99%.
What about managing state? Are you using anything besides React Context?
I'm not even using context all that much. I'm using props and use state for the most part. So passing props, lifting props up, and just local use state in my components. That's got me pretty far. Sometimes I feel as though I am not doing it properly, or I'm a bit of a React fraud if I'm not using a library, a state management library. But man, I've gotten a good amount of the way through here without reaching for one, and I think it's simpler. I think I'd like to keep it that way. So, yeah, use state is my go-to. That's for sure.
I think that's a fine way to do it. And in fact, some of the things that Redwood gives you, I think, make it easier to not have to rely on heavier weight state management tools.
Yep.
So that's great to see that how far you've gone without needing to reach for one of those heavier weight state management
Absolutely.
libraries.
Yep.
I'd love to ask you about your startup itself. How long have you been working on CourseLift, and are you planning to raise money for it and build out a team, bootstrap? I'd love to know what you intend your path to be.
Yeah, for sure. I got started officially in August of last year, so August 2021. That's kind of when I kicked off building things. I'd been sort of ideating on it for a couple months prior. That was, at that point, kind of middle of the year, 2021 is when I started to solidify on it as what I wanted to do. And largely because it's something that, I've got experience in. It's, I'm a course author, have been for a few years now. And if no one ends up using it, at least I'll benefit from it. That's kind of my, that's my backup plan with it. But yeah, in terms of like how it's rolling, it's a bootstrapped effort. So it's really just me and, put in a little bit of capital to, pay for the things that need to be paid for. But yeah, it's otherwise just me kind of putting in the sweat to it. In terms of like whether or not there will be a team built out and funding raised, perhaps in the future, definitely want to get it to a point where the product is validated and see how the market responds. I've been super stoked about the early kind of interest in it. I've got a good sized list of people who have said, "Yep, sign me up to be part of the beta group." People have verified kind of like pricing ideas that I've got and said, "Yeah, that makes sense for me." So it's lots of talk right now, but it looks like the market has been well, at least the market has been in place for a long time for a product like this. It's a validated market, so that's helpful. And people that have seen what CourseLift aims to offer in terms of like the help with marketing, the help with getting your course to a point where it sells well. People have been responding to that really well, so I'm excited for that. Looking to get this into the hands of users, kind of early stages of Q2 this year. So come next month, once we're into April, that'll be the point at which beta users will be in there, and then the full thing released. Hopefully not too much longer after that.
All right, and you were showing the website before, but maybe just reiterate where viewers can find your startup website and maybe your Twitter.
Sure thing. Yeah, so CourseLift.com. That's the website. On Twitter, I'm at Ryan Chenkie. So Ryan, Chenkie there, and tweet a lot about CourseLift. Show kind of progress, features that I've been working on, that sort of stuff, and a few tweets about Redwood as well, just about my pleasure working with it as I've been going, which I commend you and the Redwood team. It is an awesome product to work with. The benefits of Redwood are apparent as I have been working with it throughout building CourseLift and the apps that I work on as part of my agency work. It's just awesome. Super time savings, super like well-reasoned, well thought about architecture and layout. It means that I don't have to think about a lot of the nitty-gritty details as I'm building things out, and that's definitely what I like.
Awesome. Well, we're very excited to have you in the community. And I have one last question for you, which is for our listeners who are on a similar journey, thinking about building a startup or currently building a startup, do you have any piece of advice, something that you've learned along the way that you think would be useful?
Yeah, well, I'm very much a noob at this myself, so I don't know if I have any sage advice. But the thing that I have that I think has been beneficial as I've been doing CourseLift is that I started talking about it early on. I had a bit of a Twitter audience kind of built up over the years through, other work at when I worked at Auth0, when I worked at Prisma. I built up a bit of an audience, and it seems to be the case that like building that audience and then talking about a product that I'm working on that would potentially benefit members of my audience is a good way to validate whether or not it's it'll be received well. The early indications that I get, because I've been building this audience and kind of speaking to them about what I'm building, seem to be good. So I would do that. Think about building an audience if you can before going into a product. It can be helpful. I don't think from everything that I've read and seen, I don't think that's going to be a silver bullet. For the long run, I think you got to build a good product and market it properly and all that. Aside from that, I think it's like find something to work on that's in a proven market, something that is already established. I think that's going to give you a really a much easier time building your product and marketing it and selling it than you otherwise would have if you're trying to create a category. I mean, that's for perhaps a certain type of startup founder, but maybe not me. I want to work in a market that's been proven out and established and where I know I can offer value.
Well, it sounds like sage advice to me. Ryan
Well,
Chenkie,
thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Tom.